Hello and welcome everyone to this April 17th, 2025 webinar titled Unlocking Grid Flexibility, Updates on Flexible Service Connection and 23.5 CSIP Test Procedures. My name is Dylan Tansey and I'm the Executive Director of the SunSpec Alliance. This webinar is scheduled for 90 minutes because we have a ton to get through today and we want to be able to provide about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So please stick around to the end. And I will also try to be brisk with my opening remarks so we can get to it. Since you've joined us here today, I presume that you are all familiar with the SunSpec Alliance, but for those that are new to us, I'll just introduce us real quick. SunSpec is a 501c6 not-for-profit trade alliance that seeks to grow the DER industry through the development, support, and maintenance of open, royalty-free interoperability communication standards. We're supported by about 170 contributing members from around the world, and have issued about 200 certifications, which cover hundreds of product lines and thousands of product models. One of the most important certification programs SunSpec manages is for IEEE 23.5 CSIP. SunSpec CSIP certification is the primary mechanism for fulfilling California Rule 21 CSIP requirements, and we have supported that not just with compliance certification in partnership with our network of authorized test labs, but also by providing free test PKI certificates for members and non-members alike who are implementing protocol and developing products for the market, as well as setting up a production route PKI, which is vital for real-world development and deployment of these networks. And that brings us to the topic of today's webinar. I'm really excited for this webinar today for three main reasons. First of all, going back to when SunSpec first issued its very first SunSpec CSIP certification way back in August 2019, almost 6 years ago now. One of the most frequently asked questions we receive from members is when will these grid operators actually start using and deploying this stuff? And well, today we are here to report on a real life use case that is impacting the DER market, enabling greater deployment and generating value for stakeholders throughout the value chain. Not just in California, but also internationally, and we'll be hearing some today about this program and in Australia as well. We also have a great panel for you today, and in my opinion, this is where SunSpec is at its best, when it's not simply us presenting to you, but instead providing a platform and venue for our members and experts in the industry to come together and discuss common issues and how standardization and interoperability can drive industry growth. That's what we have in store for you today, and that's what we provide in our work groups as well. The third reason I'm really excited for today is where before SunSpec and its members developed the CSIP test procedures and stood up the first ever CSIP certification program to ensure interoperability and enable companies to continue doing business under California Rule 21. We are now the official venue for CSIP test procedure for the CSIP test procedures maintenance chosen by the CPUC and the industry. This development has occurred because we have a proven track record of producing high quality, open, and transparent compliance criteria on an open and royalty-free basis with zero barriers to implementation and developing products and extremely low barriers for entry for participating in the standards development process. So I'm really excited to talk to you at the end of this webinar to let you all know about the next steps in CSIP standards development. But first, we'll hear some about real-world applications for CSIP and how it's being used today. Last thing, before I read the standard admonitions and hand it off to today's panel, I'll address the most frequently asked questions. Yes, the slides and the recording will be distributed to everybody who has registered. And also, this webinar is an open mic, but we do ask you that you keep yourself muted and your camera off to ensure background noise is kept to a minimum, and we have a good high quality recording at the end of this. There will be time for Q&A at the end of this, and you are also more than welcome to input your questions in the chat throughout the meeting. We'll do our best to get to all of them at the end as well. If we aren't able to get to your questions or you would like to reach out to us individually, please contact membership@sunspec.org. Now for the admonition, and then I'll hand it off to our panel moderator, Vishkanti. All SunSpec meetings are conducted in accordance with the SunSpec antitrust policy and intellectual property provisions defined in the SunSpec member agreement. This agreement can be found at the following address. SunSpec strictly prohibits market participants and their employees who take part in these activities from using their participation as a forum for engaging in practices or communications that violate antitrust laws. Confidential or proprietary information should not be discussed in open session. Please contact SunSpec management if you have any questions. With that, Vish, take it away, and can't wait to hear what you and the panel have to say.
Thank you, Dylan. I'll be the MC for the session. I'm Vish Kanti, President and CEO of DER Security. DER Security. Adarsh Madhavan, who's also the Flex Connect Program Manager. We'll be hearing directly from the PG&E Program Manager around flexible service connections and what they've been up to. Just from down under, we have Pradeep Mishra, who is the founder of Arion Systems. So he's going to share the perspective of what is happening in Australia with respect to flexible service connections. They may call it different things, but effectively it's the same application. And then we have Ben Schwartz from Clean Coalition, who's leading policy. So the way I want to, what I want to do is set the context. I'll go through a few slides to make sure everybody has the same baseline understanding of what flexible service connections are. I want to demystify the alphabet soup. You'll be hearing a lot of terms. But first, when we are talking about flexible service connections, we are referring to assets and energy assets, which we call distributed energy resources, that are responsive in nature. They could be battery systems, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, a solar on-site generation, or even flexible buildings to that point. Right? These are all distributed energy resources. They're distributed in nature and are spread out across the grid. I also want to introduce you to a term called hosting capacity. Hosting capacity essentially means it is the amount of energy, amount of DER that can be located on the grid. Think of this as a traffic map, and I have an example of this in a couple of slides here. Effectively, this tells you exactly where to place these DERs, how much the grid can support or cannot support. And this is very critical to delivering flexible service connections as a use case, primarily because you know where not to place the assets. So that's flexible hosting capacity. And the third term that I want everybody to keep in mind, and we'll use this pretty repeatedly here, are called dynamic operating envelopes. These are the technical and operational limits that are communicated by the utility to the end devices or the sites. And these are the constraints that are being imposed to adjust the site's operational characteristics within those boundary conditions. So we'll hear a lot about all of this today. So I'm super excited for the expert panel that's here. But first, what is flexible service connection? The best example I could find was, think of this as the carpool lane. What carpool lanes are effectively doing is allowing to expand the capacity of the road network without building new roads. So when there's no traffic during off-peak hours, you're able to use that HOV lane without actually putting another extra lane. But when there is congestion on the road, there's limited the vehicles that can actually use and access the carpool lane need to have more than two people, right? So think of this as the way to expand the capacity of the road network without adding new lanes. Similarly, flexible service connections effectively do the same thing. Without increasing the grid capacity, you're able to interconnect demand DERs faster to the grid, and it basically increases the capacity of the grid. And so we'll dive more deep into this how it's done and what are the enabling technologies. But first, I want everybody to keep in mind that this is a contract mechanism or a contracting scheme that is addressing certain business problems. and it has enabling technologies behind it that enable this. But it effectively is the relationship between a utility and an end customer or a site or a facility that says you will operate the site. Your permission to operate is given on the pretext that you will be within the limits that are set by the utility, and those limits are not static; those are dynamic limits. So what goes into this process is it's a very data-enabled business model. First, utilities typically pull in the data from AMI, the generation assets, GIS, or network maps. That's the data domain. They input all of that into the hosting capacity analysis, which we talked about earlier. That's the planning domain. And so that then when we move into operational domain, these are more dynamic, real-time in nature. They compute these limits at the site level and communicate that so that these limits are become hard limits for the site to be compliant with. So those are encapsulated in interconnection agreements effectively. So it's a contract mechanism that is enabled by this entire data-driven architecture. So here I promised you I'll show you an example of a hosting capacity map. This is straight out of PG&E's Grid Resource Integration Portal. I highly suggest you check this out. These are maps that you can pull in and use for planning exactly where DERs have to be placed. What this is showing you is the green areas are the ones that there is capacity to host solar assets on there. There are other type of hosting capacity calculations that are shown on the left. But effectively, the focus is the areas that are mapped out as red in this network are areas that would either the grid has to be upgraded, or the utility will take longer to interconnect those resources because the grid cannot support it. So this, again, is in the planning side. So when commercial industrial sites actually request for integration of, in their interconnection requests, they apply to the utility, this is the process that is followed. And thank goodness that now this map is actually available for public use. So highly encourage you to check this out. So what is and we also talked earlier about dynamic operating envelopes. Here is an exact view of what that looks like. Utility actually manages a system called the grid DERMS. These are this management systems to manage distributed energy resources. Those systems actually compute what are these dynamic operating envelopes, or DOEs, not to confuse with Department of Energy. Right? These are site-level requirements that establish at what level the site can either consume or feed back into the grid. They could be both sides, and others will cover more about this. And when these limits are communicated to the site, all the load resources or generation resources effectively have to comply and adjust their site-level operation characteristics. Let's take, a V2G charging depot as an example. When a limit is actually set, the chargers either have to curtail or under certain conditions have the ability to discharge back into the grid. So the control schemes and the concept is not new. We've seen this in virtual power plants and demand response use cases historically, but it's probably the first time we're using this concept to administer a interconnection permit. So what type of resources do these apply to? Charging depots, commercial industrial facilities, residential. This is something that we'll hear in what's happening in Australia. But what I'm really excited about is data centers, which are flexible, also could be interconnected under this new regime. Historically, getting these interconnection permits takes very long time, especially if you are, in the megawatt order. It takes 2 to 3 years. And this has been this is a key bottleneck that flexible service connections is trying to address, so that we can bring load faster, energy available to those sites under certain operational characteristics or conditions. So here is a view of what the historical view, what we did with static connection limits. What you see here on the left side is effectively a static interconnection limit when the grid capacity is lower than what the site is requesting. Normally, the utility would do a study and say, we cannot approve this site to come online unless you change the way the site is operated, or reduce the load, or reduce the amount you're requesting. This is done because the grid is not ready. It's probably having congestion problems, or the transformers and the other network equipment needs to be upgraded to support the load that is requested. Now, under the flexible service connection regime, you effectively you can curtail the excess power that is above and beyond what the grid can support. And under this condition, you are able to get interconnected faster rather than wait for the utility to come out there and to upgrade the grid. I think this is the first of its kind in terms of, historically we've built a one-way grid. Now with these distributed resources, making it bidirectional in nature, this is a very groundbreaking use case for how DERs will be interconnected going forward. I just want to flash this, and I think the key thing here is on the left side of this, you see the utility OT network or operational network, which has the ADMS system. This is the one that is connecting to all the distribution assets, transmission assets, as all this network model that is transferred. Adjacent to that is the grid DERMS, which is doing all the computation and calculations of the dynamic operating limits or envelopes. And it communicates either directly to the sites, which are behind the meter, or can send that information to an aggregator so that the aggregator then cascades that information down to the DER. They could use other formats like OpenADR or other protocols, but the de facto protocol that the grid DERM supports for this type of use case is IEEE 22.5, which is, again, tested and provided by SunSpec Alliance. The other thing is, in this order, there is actually two ways. You would either directly connect to the site using an end device client, IEEE 20.5 end device client, which is embedded in all CSIP compliant and IEEE UL 1547 compliant devices. But also there is a cloud-based aggregator client which can provide interfaces to aggregator platforms that receive it and then send it downstream to the device. So I think there is no one size, there's no perfect answer to which one is the right way to do it. But I think the protocol and the architecture provides the flexibility to choose which one works best based on the market conditions. The reason why I brought up aggregators here is aggregators are also providing market access to these DERs upstream into energy markets, and they might be operating them in virtual power plants and other programs, like grid services type of programs. So there is a little bit of duality in terms of who controls the assets and for what reasons. I think that comes very clear when you see this view. On the left side of this is the DERs, the various type of DERs, and based on the role of the participant, whether it's a market operator or a retailer, they have different needs. Whether some have data requirements, others have control requirements, and the fundamental question that is still being discussed in the policy realm is which signals get prioritized. If the aggregator is sending a signal versus a utility who is here depicted as DNSP or distributed network operator, if they send a signal, which one should take priority? And what are the cybersecurity requirements? You have a whole host of people trying to access these DERs on, whether that's through APIs or standards. What are some of the cybersecurity requirements that we need to keep in mind? How do we accomplish interoperability? And what is the most valuable site optimization logic, that is to be applied at a facility level in order to be within these, to be in compliance with your agreements with the utility, but also participate in these programs. One fundamental thing is, in my view, the dynamic operating envelopes and the flexible service connection limits take the higher precedence because those are requirements to operate the grid safely and reliably over any economic value streams that are unlocked by these other layers that you see on top, aggregators or retailers, etc. So I hope this kind of paints a very good picture of all the terms and the problem statement. I want to turn it over to Adarsh. He's actually the expert in this. He's been living this with customers. Adarsh, over to you.
Thank you, Vish. So I'm just going to talk about the flexible service connection use case from PG&E's perspective, and what our program is. And I'm going to set the stage, and then in the Q&A we can talk about like what are the challenges that we're facing from scaling this program. Which next slide, please. Thank you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, except for the fact that the demand for electricity, the amount of DERs behind the meter or front of meter is just increasing with time. And PG&E has invested in the DERMS platform, which is our platform, our software tool that we will use to dispatch DER resources. Prior to this, we had no way of having visibility and control is, way down the line. But with our DERMS platform, what we are able to do now is to see what the DER is able to do, where it's connected, how is the telemetry data coming in, and then now we can also get some control signals to the site. Next slide, please. And in the year 2023, 2024, we were just trying to get DERMS up and running and see if this can, even be done. The technical capabilities that are required, which is like Vish touched on this, the IEEE 2030.5, and the topology, which I'll talk about in detail, right? Like how are we actually going to talk to the DER that's connected to our DERM system? We have kind of established that. We have a few sites that are online and running in our DERMS platform that are control sites that are flexible. In the midterm, what we are trying to do now is to increase the use cases. And in the box that I've kind of highlighted there, I've just put Flex Connect. Flex Connect is two different use cases. There could be a flexible load interconnection where we are giving a dynamic operating limit and the load needs to stay below the limit. The same could be true for a generator. We have a flexible generation connection use case where we are giving dynamic operating limits. The generator has to stay below the limits, but obviously the flow is the opposite direction. It's towards the grid, not pulling energy from the grid. We also have another use case that is part of our flexible service connection, which is DIDIF, which is the Distribution Investment Deferral Framework. Prior to this, so DIDIF is a CPUC mandated program. And prior to having DERMS, we didn't have a way of having an energy service agreement. Hey, our bank is going to be overloaded for 4 hours in April, and we want the battery storage to provide energy services for 4 hours in April. How do you dispatch? How do you send those commands, right? Like, how do you monitor that they have actually dispatched? And DERMS is our tool to be able to do that. And that's the third use case that we are actually working on right now. Next slide, please. For the rest of the presentation, I'm going to focus only on flexible service connection. And I'm going to focus specifically on load. But the truth is you could do the same presentation again and just use the word generation and it would all remain the exact same. So flexible service connection is a bridge solution that aims to allow customers with controllable loads to connect to the system without waiting for a service upgrade. So I'm going to break that down into pieces because there's a lot there, and that's probably the most important thing that I've said about Flex Connect. It's a bridge solution, which means that a new business customer has requested 5 megawatts of energy. We only have 1 megawatt of energy power available on the grid. We are definitely going to build the capacity to serve all 5 megawatts. Until that time that the capacity is built out, the project will operate in Flex Connect. So it's a bridge solution. It's a temporary solution. I have heard a lot of discussions about, wanting to offer this as a permanent solution. PG&E is willing to explore that, but at this point, as a part of this pilot, that's the hypothesis that we want to test. How many people want this as a permanent solution? Who are the DERs that want to operate with this in a permanent solution? As a part of the pilot, we have figured out, wholesale distribution batteries are one kind of customers that don't want this as a bridge solution, right? But that's the whole point of having this as a pilot program, so that we can actually find out who are our customers, what are their business decision-making matrix, right? How do they decide what is the value stream that we're able to provide? The second thing is we aim to allow customers with controllable loads. Controllable loads for PG&E basically means you can dispatch upwards or downwards. How you do that is completely irrelevant to us. It does not mean that you need to be an inverter-based solution. It does not mean that you need to be an EV charging solution. I know that, my graphic literally shows an EV car because that's the easiest way to connect the dots. So when I'm talking about flexible loads, it's easy to think about inverters, but we're also talking to corporate campuses that are willing to put behind the meter generation. And to us, that's a flexible load. You dispatch your generation, the amount of power that you consume at the point of common coupling goes down, flexible load for the purposes of flexible service connection. And if you are willing to participate in the dynamic limits that are being sent out, you can connect right now. You don't have to wait for the service to be built out. Next slide, please. This is an example of a 3.8 megawatt EV charging station that applied to connect. It's an actual example, and the site is actually live right now. On the left-hand side, you can see the static planning limits that Wish had in the previous slides, right? Like the static limits that we were able to do using the planning process, which restricts the site to 71% in the winter months and 20% in the summer months. So this site is a summer peaking site. However, with flexible connection, we are able to support pretty much the whole 3.8 megawatts 90% of the time, right? Over 90% of the time, we're able to give 100% of the megawatts that they're requesting. Can we go to the next slide, please? And I just want to make sure I put another slide, which is not all green, to explain that the previous one was an extremely ideal condition. It was an ideal site that, because of the configuration, because of the topology, because of the other customers that were in the particular feeder that we were looking at this flexible service connection for, it was possible to unlock the whole 3.8 megawatts. But you get a variety of different sites. This particular 5 megawatts, there is shades of green, yellow, and red, where it dispatches almost close to the planning limit. Similarly, there have been certain cases where you have large industrial sites that are connected to the feeder, which is why the flexible service graph, the 288R graph on the right, looks exactly like the graph on the left. There is no available capacity that flexible service connection can unlock because of the behavior of other customers that are connected to the feeder or the behavior of the constraint itself. Next slide, please. How we do this is, again, using our DERMS platform, but what does DERMS actually do? DERMS monitors the AMI loading of all the other customers that are connected to the feeder. It monitors the loading of the bank or the constraint device, and it comes up with a forecast of how much available capacity there will be on the grid, and then it allocates that capacity to the flexible service connection site that is connecting to that feeder. A better way to talk about this is the next slide. I think that's a far better picture here. Yeah. So let's assume the constraint location is right at the substation. It could be the bank or the feeder head, right? You have a constraint there. You're not able to accommodate the megawatts that the customer is requesting. So PG&E's DERM system is going to do day-ahead forecasting. It will look at, the measurements and of all the other customers that are on the feeder to come up with a forecast of how much capacity will be available for this flexible service connection tomorrow. And using the IEEE 2030 interface, we will send out 24 values. At 8 a.m. today, we send out 24 values for tomorrow. From 8 a.m. tomorrow to 8 a.m. day after tomorrow, you will have 24 values that give you the dynamic operating envelope. And PG&E uses the IEEE 2030.5 interface and communicates that to the aggregator. The reason we require the aggregator to be installed at the edge, the customer site, is because we want it to be as open as possible to the different kinds of customers that are out there. We know for a fact that the largest EV public sites, charging sites, or the EV fleet sites use a certain kind of energy management system. But we do have other kinds of corporate campuses, which I kind of talked about. There is a biomass plant that is participating in FlexConnect. they have very, very different energy management systems. They have DNP3 logic or PLC logic, and this aggregator gives that flexibility. It's a third-party vendor that installs the aggregator on site. We have 3 that you can choose from. They have all been CSIP certified. And the point of having this aggregator is they will communicate to your site's energy management system in whatever language that your energy management system prefers. And it gives this wide variety of options for our customers. Next slide, please. So this is generally how we get projects into our pipeline. We identify a site. In the 2023 and 2024, we were very reactive. We have gone, and this is part of our outreach program. We want to present FlexConnect anywhere possible so that as many people are aware of FlexConnect. If you have a constrained site, contact flexconnect@pgnd.com, and we will walk you through how to evaluate your site for FlexConnect. We have moved to a more proactive approach where our planners, if they find a site that is a good fit for FlexConnect, they come to me, and we analyze the program even before we are going and telling the customer that you don't have capacity. The second step is evaluate. The easiest way to explain what we're doing in that evaluate stage is, if you recall the 288R graphs that I had in the previous slides, we are going from the left to the right. We want the customer to know, if you participate in FlexConnect, we want there to be a good faith estimate of what your journey in FlexConnect will look like. How much power will we be able to unlock? And like I said, not all sites are great for FlexConnect. Some sites are perfect, like the all green site that I showed you, but there are other variations of that. And we want the customer to walk into this journey knowing exactly what they're going to get. The second is an agreement. The agreement is a 2-pager non-binding agreement because this is a pilot. And the agreement basically says that we will send you a dynamic operating envelope, and you will stay below that limit. You can choose to use the capacity that we give you. It kind of depends on what your business model is. Then the stage number 4 is basically build, 5 is commissioning, testing, and then you operate the site. There is another stage where we have built out the full mitigation capacity that you have requested. We will decommission you, and you're no longer part of FlexConnect. You can use all the available capacity that you need. Next slide, please. The ideal sites are existing sites or those that are coming into service soon, and you have a long lead time for how long it takes you to get the fully requested capacity. Now, the reason this is not a hard rule that you need to have available grid capacity 2 years out. It's not a hard reason. We have had customers in our program that want to participate only for 6 months. The reason is mainly because the aggregator equipment, the third-party aggregator equipment, is customer cost. There is a net present value analysis that you could perform. Like, if I put this and aggregator equipment on site, am I going to recoup the value, right? Like, if the available capacity that I'm getting from FlexConnect is great, but it's only for 3 months, it might not be a very valuable program because you might as well wait 3 months and to get all the capacity that you're asked for. The last thing that I do want to point out is not all capacity constrained sites will be suitable for the initial pilot, because specifically a great example would be line sections. We have had sites where you're constrained by a 4-rod copper line, and the maximum capacity of that tiny line is 120 amps. There is no way FlexConnect is going to give you additional available capacity because we literally have to reconductor that tiny piece of conductor. Next slide, please. I have selected 2 sites here that I want to talk about because they're very different. So the value proposition is very different. On the left-hand side, we have a fleet site. The requested capacity is 4 megawatts. The amount of available capacity between 3 a.m. And 9 p.m. is 0. And they are able to charge at 3 megawatts between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. every day. But with FlexConnect, in the month of January, we were able to give them additional capacity 87% of the time. So whenever it says 0, we were able to give them a lot more than 0. The time that they operated with additional capacity was 90%. On average, the limit increase was 2.6 megawatts. We are measuring our impact in terms of megawatt hours. because the vision for PG&E is to deploy this at scale such that we are unlocking a lot of incremental megawatt hours, and that would have a very good effect on rates going down. And that means that the affordability piece that PG&E is working towards is going to be unlocked through terms, because now power is going to be more affordable. FlexConnect in many ways is increasing utilization off the grid, especially when you're talking about load. And when you increase utilization, if you're able to measure how much in megawatts hours, you're able to then map that to dollars. The other side of the graph is a totally, different kind of project. It's a wholesale distribution battery. This is a site that is 6 megawatts. They have a restriction for charging, not generation, charging only. The limit is 2 megawatts. They can only charge 2 megawatts. So prior to FlexConnect, when they used to operate, they would only be able to charge once a day, because they have to find that 3-hour window that you can charge at 2 megawatts, and they were charge limited. It takes them a while to do that. And their business model is basically CAISO price arbitrage, right? So they would discharge once in the day. But what we have seen is over the 3 months that they have been operating, they have pretty much ramped up to some months where they have actually charged and discharged 3 times in the day, because PG&E was able to unlock pretty much 6 megawatts of the requested power that they were looking for. I think that wraps me up, Wish, and I'm happy to talk more in Q&A.
No, I think this is very awesome. Thank you for walking us through. As the next part of this, we'll cover a few things about how things are done in Australia, what type of assets, get into the Q&A. So I have a few things that I want, at this point, Pradeep from Aryan to kind of talk about how things are happening in Australia. What are we've heard about what's happening here in PG&E, 24-hour ahead, hourly granularity, focus on large loads. In Australia, however, we're seeing smaller systems being applied for these kind of use cases. But can you walk us through what's happening there? What is the trend there, and what are some trials and success stories from that market?
Sure, Vish. Thanks. Thanks for bringing up this slide. And just like US has flexible connections and interconnections, we have flexible export trials going on for quite some time now, for more than, I guess, 7-8 years and over. So this has been tried by multiple DNSPs across here in the trials, and in different format and settings. For example, there have been trials like for Project Edit, and they were like 24-hour ahead. And then they also tried hourly dynamic operating envelopes, where they have set the static daily limits and then having the override trigger. So there are multiple permutations and combinations that have been tried in Australia in different projects. In future, where Australia is leading to, that is something which is very interesting. Australia is leading towards having this all real time, because we have this 5-minute settlement market, and we have 5-minute AMI data coming through. That gives a real position, like a real-time position at the constrained LV network site level. So that also closes the feedback loop. So which is like an additional, I would say, topping on the ice, which consistently accurates our DERM evaluation, as well as to how we are coming up with our DOEs and how accurately we are estimating it as well. That's why AMI data is leveraged quite heavily, and we have quite good AMI penetration at the same time. In Victoria, we have more than 70% AMI penetration. Other states are also catching up with that pace. So yes, and apart from that, as Adarsh was also saying, that Flex Connect is a program wherein they are doing bi-directional, dynamic adjustments onto the operating limits. The same thing is happening in Australia as well. So we are also trying the bi-directional import and export DOEs, and it is happening at not just the control level or the constraint level, but also Australia is evaluating or doing the trials on the pricing signals. So even the pricing signals are forming, one side of the solutioning wherein the flexibility has to be unlocked. for EV charging sites. Yeah.
Yeah, and would you say, like in Australia, to the extent that I know, they're also using IEEE 2030.5, the Australia CSIP version, slightly
Yes.
nuanced
So
and for
Australia
the market, but yeah.
has a mandate. So far, it has been mandated to use CCPOS interface for all the DER connections that are happening. And that's why there is a good push, and there is a business case here in Australia about having a utility server in place, which is like a middleware server
Hmm.
uh, that is going to be sitting in between the DNSP systems, market systems, and the aggregators and the edge device, edge controllers at the DER level. So there are quite a few,
Just in,
yeah. So just to decouple everything, and then at the same time, not DNSP not having to control every asset, and aggregators also have a good leverage of the market, so it opens up the market to a lot of aggregators at the same time.
yeah, so there is, in other words, the disintermediation that's happening with multiple players, retailers and aggregators and what have you, right? But the fundamental enabling technology and the communication protocols yet is 23.5. And I would be the first to say there's a lot to figure out as to who gets the dibs on what system get controlled and which signals take priority. I think even as we're learning from these pilots from Australia and in the US, that needs to be fleshed out a bit more. I also wanted to highlight that PG&E just launched a new program, a pilot program again, but that's focused on residential. And they're in this pilot, they're trying to use smart panels as the energy service interface to accomplish this. I think very early stage, it's to be seen whether IEEE 23.5 is going to play a role there, but it's the right direction because that has been proven in other markets, and I think in the US that needs to be taken into consideration. And the infrastructure is already there, right? The DERMS has been invested in, the capitalized asset. And so there's early stage indications that this stuff works for both large assets as well as small assets. I think we need to converge on a solution and the rules around it. Now that brings me to the topic about policy. Given all of these conditions, there's a lot of stuff going on the policy side. At this point, I want to bring in Ben from Clean Coalition. He's been leading the policy activities with PUC here on the flexible service connections concept. Ben, what can you tell us about the whole resource connections, what's going on with these grid services and VPPs? I have a few questions here about who gets the dibs again. Grid upgrades, what happens when you actually upgrade the grid? Do people want to stay in this pilot for long, or do they, what do you do with these assets? Let's say the PG&E upgrades the grid. What do you do with these assets after that? And is there a common standardization and terminology in all of this?
Sure, thank you. And just kind of a quick plug here, the Clean Coalition is a technical nonprofit. We are dedicated to accelerating the transition to renewable energy in a modern grid, and we do that both through projects and policy expertise. And so to kind of set the stage, right, we're at a pivotal point in the transition to the grid of the future that is increasingly bidirectional. And as we try to achieve our climate and energy goals, the state of California in particular is realizing that there are significant costs associated with that. On the distribution grid alone, conservative estimates have put that at $26 billion, and on the higher end, it's closer to $52 billion. So there's definitely a range policies that can help enable a more efficient grid that can be deployed faster where it's needed. And so from the Clean Coalition's perspective, it's really important not just to take a look at use cases, but also more broadly to kind of categorize the value opportunities from flexible connections. And we suggest doing this in two ways. One being resource connections, that is what value can controlling loads and controlling generation bring to the broader grid. And on both sides, there are quite a number of opportunities. So just going through them really quickly here, streamlined generator interconnection. For a number of the utilities in California, namely Southern California Edison and PG&E, it can definitely take some time to conduct grid upgrades and finalize the process before a generator can come on. The use of flexibility as a bridging solution is an important opportunity, and that can also be said for load energizations, particularly for large loads, as has been mentioned earlier. But I think there's also an opportunity further down the line for smaller generators and smaller energizations as well. Currently California has a cost-causer model for interconnection upgrades, meaning that if you are the one who triggers the upgrade, then you have to foot the whole cost for the entire upgrade, and that ends up benefiting future projects down the line. So one example of a type of value that could be created for the customer and for the utility is saying, well, rather than triggering that upgrade, can we avoid or defer that upgrade for a while? And that perhaps will give the utility a little bit of a better understanding of what load growth might look like in that area and allow them to more properly right-size the actual wires solution that will be needed for the grid of the future, rather than making an immediate or incremental investment only to need to make the same type of investment 2 to 3 years down the line. And then also, which has been discussed, is how are we actually scheduling the flexibility? Is it dynamic? Are there signals being sent in real time or near real time? Or is it more like California's limited generation profile, where there are a number of different blocks, and as long as you are staying within your limit in each block, then that's acceptable. I think ideally, and perhaps we'll get here at some point, is we want a solution that properly aligns with grid conditions. And by aligning with grid conditions, we can most effectively create value. And then on the resource connection side, there's also the idea of maximizing behind the meter resources. If you are able to maximize behind the meter generation, then you can more effectively prepare a site and the broader grid for resilience as well. So that kind of covers a couple of the subjects on the grid services side as well. But just kind of to reiterate, I thought that Vish's analogy of a carpool lane on a highway was a very apt one. And in terms of deferred T&D, we could think of that as, rather than adding a new lane to an existing highway, let's use the carpool lane and better spread out the available capacity. And then on the avoided T&D side, rather than building an entire new highway, let's use more existing capacity effectively. And then RA reduction, resource adequacy. This is pretty critical in California in particular, due to procurement shortages. If you have a behind the meter resource, or you can limit the load at certain times of the day, that actually helps a utility or load serving entity by reducing the total amount of resource adequacy that needs to be procured, which is extremely valuable as well. So are there ways to actually value stack, to do multiple things at once? Can a site defer a grid upgrade and at the same time help a load serving entity reduce its RA? If so, there is double value that is being created, and that's a huge opportunity for compensation. So just getting to a couple of these questions quickly, who gets the dibs? Really that comes down to the legal construct that is created, and aggregators are going to be responding to signals from someone. That may be the market, that may be a contract with a load serving entity. So it really comes down to making sure that it's clearly laid out what creates the most value, and that the customer or the aggregator knows how to prioritize and knows in advance that they will be prioritizing one value stream over another. Discussed grid upgrades a little bit, and then the last thing is terminology. Talking about this at the Public Utilities Commission, it's been kind of funny listening to folks throw around flexible connections, flexible service agreements, flexible connection service agreements. They're all kind of slight variants on the same thing, but the differences do matter. And from the Clean Coalition's perspective, standardizing both the terminology and the process to the highest extent is extremely important. And ideally, we would want all three utilities to have as similar of programs as possible. And PG&E's out ahead here at the start. So I think the other two utilities really should be working with them and learning from their success. Next slide. So from the policy perspective, all we do is try to ask questions to really think about what is the experience from the customer perspective, but then also how can the utility effectively manage a situation where in theory there could be hundreds or thousands of customers requesting flexibility across the service territory. And so on both sides, it should be streamlined and efficient. A customer should have an easy way to either request flexibility or determine where flexibility is available and valuable. On the hosting capacity maps, this could look like an additional layer that shows you green if flexibility is valuable, or another color if not. Or it might look like a request in a pre-application report that developers often submit before submitting a full interconnection application. We talked a little bit about value stacking, so let's move down to the third point, which is that flexibility is possible for both generation and load. Some customers may only have load. Some customers may start with load and then determine that it's appropriate to deploy solar plus storage, or a microgrid. And so from our perspective, those are two different rules or sets of rules and timelines. Rule 21 is for behind the meter interconnection, and then rules 15, 16, 29, and I think 45. The utilities should seek to harmonize those timelines so that there isn't waiting time or a lag time after the energization occurs before the generation comes online, or vice versa. And then there's been a discussion about distribution deferral and upgrades. I think we'll definitely talk about that a little bit more. So I'll just address the last two questions very quickly, which is that, this is a new process and there are going to continue to be kinks that need to be worked out as projects are connected and there are lessons learned. So it's extremely important to have a very clear dispute resolution process so that the customer feels that their voice is being heard, but that the utility can also make clear what the existing procedures are and determine where appropriate changes are needed. And then lastly, on equity, there was a study conducted by professors at UC Berkeley in 2021, which said that over half of residential households in the IOU service territories lack sufficient hosting capacity for even 4.5 kilowatts of solar. And so as we have folks that are starting to upgrade main panels, that are electrifying, that are adding more generation, there needs to be a way to prioritize. How can we ensure that our disadvantaged communities are not continuing to be left behind? Flexibility provides a real opportunity, but we do need to make sure that we are being targeted in our approaches and reaching out to equity communities to ensure that they are part of the solution and are benefiting from these new technological advances. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Vish.
Thank you, Ben. It's great. Now you heard almost all the presenters talk about various aspects, both in Australia, US, policy, technology side. Tom, I want to turn it over to you for your comments around standards. And when we think about this new CSIP work that SunSpec is going to lead here, what are some of the key questions that we need to keep in mind that and Dylan will talk a lot about the next part of it, about the working groups, but I want to get some comments from you.
Great. Well, first of all, it's gratifying to see that after these many years and all the hard work that's gone into building these communication systems, that they're being put to work. I mean, this is an excellent day from that perspective. Now, as these use cases come online, however, we're going to run into a few issues. There's no question. So Dylan mentioned starting, I guess it was in 2019, SunSpec did its first 23.5 CSIP certification. I believe the number of certifications for product lines, not individual products, but product lines, is over 75 now. And so that's great because we have a good array of different types of suppliers that have products in the market that have passed the basic criteria. However, basic criteria, the word basic is needs to have special emphasis here, because as we put these networks into the field, then the rubber hits the road, and then you're going to find issues with the communication systems that aren't contemplated when you're simply trying to make sure that suppliers meet the basic requirements. Those issues are going to need to be addressed, and these is called interoperability. Okay, somebody asked about how does this project compare with Project Mercury, which I think is the initiative that they're referring to, led by Crockett.
The EPRI team.
The EPRI team. Okay. Well, maybe I answered the wrong one. The Crockett team is working on something for interoperability regarding distributed energy resources. So maybe I can't answer the EPRI question, but what I will say is that industry and SunSpec in particular are going to be on the hook to drive interoperability testing because there will be issues that will come up. So that's number one. Number two, cybersecurity. So the standards developers had the foresight to put public key infrastructure into our 7-layered cake here, which is this communication network. And that's great because that means the front door is locked, and the front door has a strong lock. Now, what we have learned over time is that for any of these DERs, typically they have anywhere between 6 to 12 different parties that have ingress and egress rights to those systems. And Vish, your slide laid out half a dozen of them, but I think it missed a few. O&M providers would be a classic example. Other reporting entities. And so any of those points of ingress or egress represent a vulnerability or an expansion of the attack surface for the DR networks. And those holes are going to need to be monitored and ultimately covered up and patched and so forth. And so my company, DR Security, which Vish and I are teammates here, that's what we specialize in. And so the whole idea of our concept came out of the SunSpec Alliance, where we said, hey, in the future, we're going to have standardized networks and to cover all sorts of really interesting use cases like flexible interconnect and flexible load programs like what we have now. And to do that, it's going to require interaction with additional parties. There's going to need to be surveillance and data to support it, and we better lock down this process. So that's what I would say. Those are the two main comments that I will mention. I think in the third one is that the DR arena in the United States has 3 main communication standards that it deals with. We've talked about 2 of them, SunSpec Modbus 23.5. Actually, I believe DNP3 was also mentioned. But in addition to that, we're going to have EV chargers. EV chargers, many of them will use the same protocols, but of course, there are other standards out there like OCPP 2.01. These types of things are also going to need to be accommodated and secured and made interoperable in the future. So yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Tom. So I want to turn to you and actually understand what were some of the issues. Like, you guys are in the forerunners in this space, in the utilities game, right? I sold to utilities all my life. There's this funny statement, right? Nobody wants to be the first. Well, PG&E is the first when it comes to this in the US. What can you say about the experiences that you've heard from your customers? How long does it take? Do you see the interoperability problem? And how do you envision cybersecurity playing into all of these these issues?
So I think a good place to start might be, the challenges that we had to get some of our first sites online.
That'll be great. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that would sort of touch on some of the interoperability issues. Based on the model that we had, right? Like, we need to have an aggregator, third-party aggregator, and then we will have them communicate to different energy management systems. what we're finding is the market has multiple segments. You have segments of people that are trying to participate at scale within the flexible service connection. That means they have, several projects. Now, those are the kind of people that will be like, hey, maybe I need to have my energy management system speak IEEE 2030.5. I also want to invest in cybersecurity kind of protocols so that it can talk to DERMS. I need to do all of those kind of things because this is not a one-time play for me, right? Like flexible service connection is not a one-time play. And I have the sophisticated resources that I can deploy to build that kind of technological platform. And then I have customers within that were trying to come online last year. They were like, I don't know, you tell me what to do here, right? Like, I have no idea what this means. I don't know what IEEE 2030.5 is. This is my PLC logic. Like, how do I connect it to the aggregator? And that's where the third-party aggregator really has value, where we are literally looking at your PLC code that you wrote in 2000s, and now we are trying to figure out, like, what can we change? What are the loads that are kind of flexible in your site that we can drop? And it is, from a timeline perspective, it depends. We have had one of our sites come online in 3 months. And that was the first time that particular customer participated in Flex Connect, and took them 3 months to come online. The same customer, if they were to repeat that process, it will take them 30 days or less to do flexible service interconnection. And we had a customer for the better part of last year. What I was trying to do was get them online. And it took me like 6 to 8 months. And that's because of the kind of logic and interoperability problems that you're finding, even RSC cables and debugging all of these kind of things, which took an extremely long time because there is no kind of standard as to how a flexible service connection should work and how it should integrate into an energy management system.
Yeah, I'm actually I'm smiling because in my previous life in other companies, I did a lot of work with PG&E using OpenADR to activate commercial buildings for demand response use cases, and I found the same exact problems back then. And what you're saying now, speaking now, is echoing all of those things, and we're still working out, all the downstream integrations and communication. So, effectively, there's a lot of work to be done as an industry. And to Ben's point, this is not just a PG&E problem. This is actually a California-wide issue. And as California has proven, it's been a test bed for bringing the technologies to market first. I presume this is going to be a long-term game. In fact, other states, as they deploy DERMS in their markets, they will come upon the same problems, right? There's a lot of need to educate the market, to actually standardize these interfaces. And I'm also curious, why was there a choice that PG&E took? Maybe you know the answer to this. If not, it's okay. OpenADR versus 2030.5. In my head, I was also thinking about the same thing. I spent almost 10 years deploying OpenADR for demand response use cases. But now when it comes to flexible service connections and DERMS, I know for a fact that the DERMS system does not support OpenADR. But there was definitely a technical choice that was made. Is that because of CSIP and the compliance mandates that they are off to be compliant with CSIP that pushed PG&E to adopt 2030.5?
That's right. And some of the things like, prioritization and certain signals that we wanted to send using DERMS were 2030.5 was a better framework.
Yeah, so there is a concept for listeners. There's a concept called primacy, which says which signal or what takes precedence over the other. That is embedded into the protocol. And I think what Adarsh is referring to is 2030.5 had a better support for primacy and decision making. Obviously, the decision making of how the systems respond downstream is effectively the AMS or energy management system responsibility. But from the communication interface standpoint, I think you're sending all that information over 2030.5. I think
Okay.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment about primacy. And so with the original CSIP initiative, the 2030.5 system, of course, offers a method for providing this primacy function. And it was somewhat conjured up on the spot. and I think that there were lots of lessons learned. It's been subsequently improved somewhat in the 2023 version of the 23.5 standard. And with that said, what's been lacking around that is a firm grasp on policy, effectively, and I don't mean regulatory policy. I mean literally about I guess regulatory policy fits into it, but primacy policy, because I mentioned it may be up to a dozen different points of ingress and egress. Well, at least one of those points is going to be the building manager or the homeowner when this thing gets down to the residential level, and the homeowner is going to say, I want to charge my car now. I want to do my dishes now. I don't want to wait for any of y'all. I mean, we got a storm coming here. I need to batten down the hatches and get ready for the storm that's going to leave me without power for 3 or 4 days. And so that's an example of an input that probably doesn't fit into any utilities consideration stack at this point. But what is that homeowner or building operator going to do at any particular time? So I think this project is going to reveal a lot about how this whole primacy mechanism is going to work.
Yeah, and I cannot emphasize the importance of bringing the customer into this. Sometimes we are so blindfolded with all the things and jargon and all the other things about all these different stakeholders, the aggregators and service providers and software vendors. The key is, how does the customer participate in this? What is the customer experience for flexible service connections? And what are some of the challenges that they have to adhere to? Case in point, when you think about scheduling something a day in advance, commercial facilities and industrial sites have to adjust their operating schedules in response to the availability of the power at the site. If a production line has to be taken down, or if a building has to ramp down, something has to, you're stopping some processes on site. So that lead time is very critical in ensuring that the customer is well informed. Others, what is the mechanism in which customers get informed about these limits that are getting imposed? Besides just the technical interface, sending signals directly to the EMS systems through 2030.5, do customers get any notifications? Because they need to actually take into account how to adjust their operating schedules.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great point. And the way we do that is we share 72 hours. For some of our customers that have requested it, we send 72-hour forecast. And we explicitly have told them that you can't count on the 72 hours not changing. The 24-hour forecast is what you can take as something that's realistic and that PG&E wants to, has a high degree of certainty will happen. We also send out email notifications to the customer because they need to operate. The operators need to, even if it's a public EV charging sites, there is different levels of sophistication where some customers have the ability to turn it from red and green for each of the pedestals, saying that you can't charge here. And some customers want to have their operator go onto site and then put a bag on a pedestal, which is far more manual, right? So you need to have that signals days in advance to know how you're going to dispatch your fleet. The other side of this that I also want to mention, because it touches on it, but we haven't explicitly talked about, is how much of a guarantee is the forecast. As the flexible service connection program manager, it is to my best interest that when we give out a forecast for 24 hours, we stick to it, right? We don't want to deviate because the customers have planned a lot of things on that. But we also, from a utility operation perspective, we want the ability to send real-time signals, which the 2030.5 has, and you are able to send a real-time signal and then cancel our schedule. We technically have that ability, but it's reserved for emergency operations or loss of powers or outages and, something that's very specifically detrimental to the operation. Then we have to send a real-time signal where we deviate from the forecast.
Great. And also, can you speak to the resolution of telemetry that you're collecting? How real-time is real-time for these systems? This has been a big issue in the demand response world, because in most customers basically don't even get the real-time visibility into how they're curtailing sites, right? And so how real-time is real-time from a data acquisition standpoint?
It's in the granularity of less than minutes, but I don't have the specific numbers with me. But it's less than minutes.
That's crazy, right? That's a lot of data. Are you really sufficiently scaled? Have you scaled? Can you, how many endpoints can you actually support at, a minute, even if you take minute as our baseline? That's a
And
lot of data.
that's the value of the aggregator. So you have multiple sites and you're able to aggregate it. And then when we are looking at, even from an aggregator perspective, right, like for the communication back and forth, if we have multiple sites, it makes it very difficult for our DERM system to handle. But if we have one aggregator but 100 sites, there is still some condensation to that particular data. For control signals, the granularity for a control signal, if we dispatch a control signal, it's about 15 minutes. But for telemetry, we do need a lot more data to see what's actually happening at the site.
Great. Well, I think we've set the stage for some groundbreaking, innovative ideas here. I'm super excited with the prospects. I hope this technology can proliferate and actually speed up the interconnection of DERs. When I see my LinkedIn feed every day, I see articles about how hard it is to interconnect, especially large assets. Data centers are taking 3 to 5 years. Commercial industrial sites around 2 years to interconnect. And personally, my experience with residential assets, they take anywhere to 3 to 6 months to interconnect, given that all of these limits exist. With this, I want to open up for questions and Q&A and see if folks have any questions. And at the tail end of it, I will bring in Dylan to talk about the next working groups that we're launching for all of these topics to be addressed.
All right, Vish. So I'll read a few things from the chat.
Sure, thank you.
First one is from Brian Krotaz. How many DERs do you have online today in DERMS? I think that's a question for Adarsh.
So we have a total of 3 live sites, with one that is no longer operational. Like we were able to give them full capacity, so we probably have had 4. But from telemetry standpoint, we have these are control sites. From telemetry, we have over 20, several sites which are in DERMS, which we have visibility to.
Mm-hmm. And others on extending that, what does your pipeline look like for this pilot? What was the initial expectation and sites or megawatts? How do you measure success for this pilot?
So we are targeting 18 live sites this year. To that extent, we have about 12 with signed agreements with in-service dates in 2025, with another 4 or 5 for next year. So we have a robust pipeline with a lot of projects coming online. We did lose a couple of projects when the CARB ACF waiver was withdrawn.
I see. That's great. Thank you, Adarsh. Tom, next question.
All right. The next question is from Martin Desjardins. I thought that the webinar would be more technical. I was there to gather all the steps needed to implement the support of 2030.5 in our battery energy storage systems. Any insights on that matter?
Yeah,
and,
I can
go ahead. That one's for you.
Yeah, I can go ahead and take that one. So yes, all the specifications required for beginning to implement 2030.5 and CSIP are all freely available through the SunSpec website, both CSIP and the test procedures. In addition, there is a robust network and ecosystem available to you to obtain technical support, coming directly through the SunSpec Alliance, going through our authorized test software providers, and going through our network of authorized test labs as well. There are many resources available to you to obtain additional instruction and training above and beyond the freely available specifications, as well as many online training modules, including through the SunSpec Alliance. So if you are in need of technical support on the implementation, certification process, and so on, reach out to SunSpec and we'll be happy to support you. And
and reach out to me as well. I'm happy to guide you through the process.
Great. All right. The next one's not a question. It's a statement from Bruce Nordman. And he says, this must be a permanent solution. The only alternative is to massively overbuild the distribution system or deny customer interconnects. Okay.
So
I think it's a very good comment. Others, yeah.
I have a comment about that. By talking to our customers in our pipeline, there are some segments of customers that clearly are okay with FlexConnect being a permanent solution, but there are a lot of who don't want that to be a permanent solution. And I feel like that's where it goes to, Ben's comment that there needs to be some sort of policy venues that utilities can follow, because Rule 15, 16, 29 are not flexible enough for us to have that kind of differentiate between customers who want interconnections that are flexible versus non-flexible, right? Like we need some kind of policy arrangement through which we can tell that for certain customers, it's okay. If you're, as a part of your interconnection application, if you let us know that you're flexible and you're willing to remain that way, we can do certain things not to build that upgrade. And that kind of also ties in about, investment deferral. Without that mechanism, investment deferral is extremely long, far drawn out like goal, because we need a mechanism to say that, okay, in this area, we only have one new business and we will treat it as flexible. You're permanently flexible unless another 10 applicants come and ask for that same capacity, right? Because then it's pointless to be flexible.
Yeah, and I actually agree with Bruce that, if you're a customer who's going through the pain of putting all this infrastructure, site design, engineering, and then they have to go back and reshape how all of this has to work after the grid gets upgraded, I think that poses its own challenges, and again, re-engineering of that site. So I would actually like to argue that this has, if it's built into the design of the site, it has to be a permanent solution, and the infrastructure is already there. Take advantage of it. Alternatively, the infrastructure could be available for other grid services. It could be monetized for frequency regulation or other type of grid services that are high value, not just compliance for interconnection agreements. So there's both sides, but the market and the customers are the ones who will be dictating that.
All right, we're going to take one more. We're going to address one more question, and then we're going to turn over to Dylan to take it home and to do the announcement about the CSIP test procedure. All right, so that this last question is from our friend Prabhakar Nilor, and to set up the question, he says, since the FlexConnect programs are stopgap solutions with limited and variable lifespan of these FlexConnect programs, as they are subject to circuit upgrades, this will have implications on pricing, warranties, and max years of customers, DER subscriptions, etc., for aggregators and providers. How do we handle such unpredictability as aggregators and solution providers and their investments? Please share your perspectives.
Do you want me to go first? I have a, and Vish, where you left off about it being a permanent solution and having investment, and what Prabhakar is asking is kind of tied.
Yeah.
As a part of the pilot, we don't see that this business model as it stands currently, where the cost, it's not a permanent solution, it is going to be super sustainable. After the mitigation project is built, either you participate in DR programs, you're a certain type of customers who has an appetite to do that, or the aggregator is not being contracted by the customer, or PG&E is looking at installing these aggregator equipment at different sites. Like, there has to be a different business model where we, as a utility, absorb some of the risk, or there has to be something else in place. And as part of that pilot, that's the question that we're also trying to answer.
Yeah, and I think, as it was just demonstrated in automated demand response programs historically, that was incentivized by the utilities. They paid for the infrastructure to be deployed, to site to be automated. So customers actually, they take away the capital risk, and customers can monetize their flexibility into demand response programs. So that has not actually been done for flexible connects, but I think all the learnings that you're seeing from real world pilots will be weaved into a more formalized program that's actually statewide rather than utility specific. But you've got to start somewhere, and I'm glad PG&E and my home turf here, they're starting this and leading this. And so with that, I think go ahead.
To add quickly here, I think that having upfront information increases the ability to have certainty about monetizing those assets, right? If I can click opt-in and this asset will be potentially studied for a flexible connection, and the utility will explain, what my options are, that helps with modeling, as does understanding that there's some sort of compensation if I'm providing the utility a service, so they can then, for the next 2 years, prioritize upgrading other feeders before coming back to this one. And then to just kind of put a plug in for Australia, what I read based on the learnings from Australia is that they had initial static limits of 5 kilowatts for residential solar, and that following the implementation of dynamic operating envelopes, that almost doubled to close to 10 kilowatts. So there's massive potential, and clearly this can be a bridging solution, but California has significant financial implications associated with upgrading the grid, and for both the customer and maximizing their ability to mitigate load and make money, but also from the utilities perspective as well. There are definitive possibilities for this as a permanent solution as well.
This is exactly how we did, again, going back to my comment about the carpool lanes and HOV lanes. We could have keep carpool lanes or decide to expand the roads, but that's going to take a lot of CapEx. And, as we've seen with carpool lanes, they work really well. That's a trusted and proven model. And I think we will see some of that, in the flexible connection on the grid side as well. With that, I want to turn it over to Dylan to take it home. Effectively, all of this means these conversations were very good. We know what the problems are. How are we going to address that? And what is the role SunSpec Alliance is going to play in the upcoming months to years with this new CSIP framework? Dylan?
Great. Thanks so much, Vish, and to the rest of the panelists as well. So we have two really important announcements to make before we drop off for the day. So CSIP, as it has been certified and deployed so far, is based off the previous version of 23.5, and CSIP was developed internally at the California Public Utility Commission. Since then, 23.5 itself has been revised to the now 2023 version, which means that it is time for CSIP and the associated CSIP test procedures to be updated. And the CPUC has chosen, and along with the industry through an open process, to assign the responsibility for the CSIP profile update to be managed through IEEE, and the CSIP test procedures to be update to be managed through SunSpec. And we are excited because, talking to all the stakeholders, we are taking a global approach. We know Australia has in many ways leapfrogged the US and California in terms of its deployment of 23.5 networks. And so we are in this initiative and in this effort to update CSIP and CSIP test procedure. We are really doing our best to take a global perspective, scheduling these meetings at a time that's convenient for the international community, and address the global marketplace where 23.5 is being deployed. So the IEEE committee, where CSIP is going to be updated, is beginning to meet on May 1st at, actually, can you go back one slide or to the starting with the IEEE? Oh, sorry, got reversed from before. Well,
Maybe this one, right?
Okay, no, sorry. I'll just continue on. So May 1st is going to be when the SunSpec test procedures work group is going to begin meeting. We'll be meeting every other week. Participation is going to be it's going to be an entity level work group. So one entity, one vote. Most participants are going to be asked to join the Alliance as a contributing member. We do have the option for no cost participation with the limited participation agreement, primarily reserved for government employees, nonprofits, educational institutes, and special exceptions as well. The CSIP updates are being managed under IEEE. Here we go. Those meetings are going to begin on April 23rd, meeting every other week. And so that's also going to be an entity work group where you'll need to be a member of IEEE to participate there. And so we are going to go ahead and get started immediately on the test procedures in the SunSpec committee. You may be wondering, because we need the actual core profile to develop test procedures for. What are we going to be doing? But there is a lot of work we can get started on immediately. And that includes finalizing the work group policies and procedures, addressing known issues from the existing CSIP test procedures, finalizing the approach that we're going to take to develop broad test procedures that can be used to define test criteria for a wide variety of 23.5 profiles above and beyond just CSIP, so including CSIP Oz, 23.5 metering profile, and as well as a 23.5 profile for SAE J3072. So this is a V2G application for 23.5. This is a specification that's currently in test status, developed by SunSpec and its work group. That was put on hold about a year ago because SAE J3072 is going through a revision. But that work has been completed now, and so we're going to dust that off and finalize that so that we can begin working on test procedures for this variety of 23.5 profiles. So please do reach out to us to inquire about how to get involved. We are right now offering a 10% discount for all new members of the SunSpec Alliance if they join within the next 30 days. So we have a discount code, membership 10, that will expire on May 17th. So you got exactly 1 month to acquire this discount. The link is right there in the slide to automatically apply this discount. And you'll need to sign up for the work group through the SunSpec member portal. Again, the link is there, and these slides will be distributed, so you'll have the links. The other slide also does include links on where to go to sign up for the IEEE committee as well. So I strongly encourage everybody here to participate in both venues, both in the CSIP update and the test procedures update, because these are going to be very important and continue to be the law of the land here in California and continue to be deployed internationally as well, and be important for the continued development and deployment of DER. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and conclude. So thank you so much, everybody here, for your attention. Thank you so much to our panelists. Really appreciate all your input, and we look forward to connecting with all of you. Have a great one. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for the panelists. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.